would be much confusion going on and much false teaching taking place. He says, if it were possible, the very elect would be deceived. And so that's that's the basis of what that we try to teach here is as close to the Scriptures as an understanding of the Scriptures that we can get. And we're not saying that everything that about this calendar is 100% true and correct, but it's the closest that I have come to in my studies of all these different things. And I know that that's the hot topic on the internet today is Zadok calendar and all of these extra biblical texts that have been around actually since the middle to late 40s, because in 1946 was when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the caverns. And some of those books were contained in those caverns. And there's set off quite a search and also trying to even ascertain and who these people really were, who these Essenes really are. And there's a lot of different scholars with a lot of different ideas of who they were and what they were about and so on and so forth. So, in that sense, we want to continue on with our study in Genesis here. And one of the things that we want to look at in our Torah portion, Noah, is the flood. And you might ask, well, what that has to do with the calendar? Well, it has some interesting things about it, about the calendar in the tell or the story of the flood. So we're going to start with Genesis 6:8. It says, "But Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh." Interesting that, in our modern understanding of Christianity, that grace only come along when Yeshua came upon the scene. But we know that grace has been there from the very, very beginning. If there was no grace, then Adam and Eve would have not lived at all and would have not been able to continue on and populate the world. So here once again we found that a man found grace in the eyes of Yahweh. Wonder why that he found grace. Why? These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with Yahweh. So, in the very first two texts here, it tells us that he was a just man. What would that lead us to believe what a just man is? One that lives his life not only right, but justly, not only the connection that he had with the Father, but the connection that he had with his fellow man. And that's what we're called to be as just men, that we judge righteously by God's commandments and be perfect in his generation. And I know there's much discussion on this word, this part of it, perfect in his generations. Some, if you look up the word perfect, it's tamid, which is actually without blemish. It is what is considered the sacrificial part of the lamb, that lamb is tamid. He is without any physical blemishes that can be seen. So he is perfect tamid in his generation. He was in right standing with the Father. I know there's even things talked about the DNA, that this had more to do with his DNA physical than it does spiritual, which it could very have both. So, because we know that there was a lot of bad things that was going on in that world back then, and we know that the Bible says that in the end time it will be like it was in the days of Noah. So we see in our science communities and things that are taking place, the splicing of genes and the all these different things that they're doing with our food and our plants and our animals, and even with man. It says, and Noah walked with Yahweh. Well, we can see that word was used in the first part of Genesis there, because it says that Adam walked with the Father in the cool of the evening in the garden. So this doesn't necessarily mean that he physically walked with him, but spiritually he walked the walk. You know, we're always talking about it's real easy to talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? Can you walk in the pathway that the Father has set down from the very beginning? And Noah was a man that walked in that pathway. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth also was corrupt before Yahweh, and the earth was filled with violence. So, Yahweh looked upon the earth and beheld it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Well, we could look at that in 2 different ways. His way being our own way, that we had corrupted our own way upon the earth, or his way. And I think it has more of a connection there, that they had corrupted his way, the Father's way, upon the earth. Much like that we're seeing today, how that the Father's way has been corrupted and added to and taken from, and all these different things that we're seeing in our world. And Yahweh said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Well, if it's supposed to be like it was in the days of Noah, we can just turn on our TV and we see it. Almost every day there is violence going on somewhere in our world, and even in the United States. Very much violence. So, and we see that, these mass killings and mass murders and so on and so forth. If our leaders rush to say, well, it's too many guns. No, it's the matter of the heart. There's the problem. The matter is in the heart, not with weapons. It's in man's heart, just like it was here. It says it's in their heart to do evil. So, and as we go on, and Yahweh said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. That was quite a thing to behold. We don't know how many millions of people inhabited the earth during Noah's time, but I would assume that it was quite a few people. Yet out of all of those people that were on the earth, that Noah was seen as righteous. Of course, we can look at the word righteous. It means right doing. In other words, following all of his commands and living a righteous life. It says, of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and the beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by 7s, the male and female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. Well, we can look at that in 2 different ways, that seed, okay, to keep the seed alive. We could look at it physically, because, and particularly, that he connected this with the fowls of the air, because we know that the birds have a lot to do with the scattering of seed, the actual seed of our plants. And without birds and these types of things, that the seed would not be scattered like it needs to be. It says, and also for multiplication. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according to all that Yahweh commanded him. Interesting that when he went into the ark, that he was in there for 7 days before it rained. And so we see that so many 7s have so many connections back to the Father and his ways, that possibly, I know a lot of people do believe, that this week that was the Shabbat. In other words, possibly went in on the first day of the week, and after the Shabbat, it began to rain. Give them that 7 days to be in the ark. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. So Noah, that's what they call perseverance. Just think he had lived for 600 years of righteous life. Wow. We have a hard time in our short period of time of staying on the way, in the way, and staying right doing. It says, and the rain was up on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. They went in to Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as Yahweh had commanded him, and Yahweh shut him in. He shut the door. So for 7 days they were in there with the door shut. And you can imagine the people around about the ark either wondering what in the world was going on, seeing all these animals come and get into the ark, shutting the door. You think possibly there was people that were jeering him, say, "Oh man, it's gonna flood. What are you gonna do in there with all your animals in there? It ain't gonna rain. What's your problem, man?" But we know that when it began to rain, there was a change of heart, wasn't there? I'm sure there was many banging on the door, wanting in, but God had shut the door. Much like that we can see in Revelation, different places. He talks about, when he's talking about the 7 churches, he said, "I set an open door before you that no man can shut." So we know that when the time has come that for judgment, that it will happen, and that there's nothing that we can do about it. Whatever the time is, when the time is full, it's like when he talks about when he went up to be crucified, he said when his time was full, he went up and he was ready. So there will be a shut door period of time of us or those that live at the end of probationary time for man. There will come a shut door time that we can no longer enter in. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day where all the fountains of the great deep broke up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So it really shows us and tells us that there had to be some mechanism to be able to count time. Because here we are, it says in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month. So from the time of creation, in Adam's time, there was a calendar that kept record of time. The time was set into motion, and there was a record of it. I know that a lot of people say, well, how do you know that, this and that and the other? Well, they must have had something if they were able to say on this certain day of this certain year that this happened, or that I was 600 years old this certain day. So, it says that same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened in the 2nd month, 17th day of the month. Interesting. How it says, how does that compare, or is there any reason, particularly why maybe it was on this time? Why wasn't it maybe on the 1st month, the 17th day, or the 1st month to the 1st month, Well, later on as we read about in the Torah, about the writing down of the law at Mount Sinai, because I think from the very beginning that God's law was in existence. I don't believe that it come into existence only at Mount Sinai and given to Moses. I think it was replicated and written down at that particular time. It was a renewal, I think, of what they knew before, but possibly had wandered away from and forgotten. So we find in that Torah that there is such a thing as a second Passover. For those that were on a journey or unclean or whatever it might be, that 1 month after the first Passover that you can have a second Passover. So it's kind of interesting that in the second month, 17th day, which would be 3 days after the second Passover, because it would also fall on the 14th day at even in the second month. So it's just kind of interesting because we've studied the feast day. We've come to realize that the Passover is not only redemption, but it's judgment, and that a lot of the pouring out of judgment occurs at Passover time. So it's kind of interesting that the earth had been judged basically here, and the sentence set down in the second month on the 17th day of that month. So if we understand that this whole system of worship, this whole system of the sanctuary was put in existence at the foundation of the world, as we know that it is because we can read in last week's Torah portion where that when Adam and Eve sinned, they were driven out of the garden, and at the east gate was placed a cherubim with a flaming sword that protected the way of the tree of life. So we see that very same thing in the earthly sanctuary tabernacle that God told Moses to build. That these cherubims sat on each end of the mercy seat, where the very presence of Jehovah came down and rested, and that the east gate was the gate that they were to enter in to worship. So we're going to move on. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And the self-same day entered Noah, Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, Noah's wife, and 3 wives of his son with him into the ark, they and every beast of every kind, all the cattle of their kind, every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth after his kind, every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. They went into Noah, into the ark, 2 by 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. It says, and he shut them in. Okay. So, and every living substance was destroyed which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heavens, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. I want you to pay attention to these things that are being said here. Sometimes we read through these things and it just by passing, 150 days, 600 years old, and on the second month, 17th day. Waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. And God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters began to draw back. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually. After the end of the 150 days, the water was abated. 150 days, second month, 17th day. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually into the 10th month, and the 10th month on the first day of the month for the tops of the mountains seen. So interesting here. We have 2 dates, the second month, 17th day. We have the other 7th month, 17th day. On the same day, 5 months apart, 150 days. Why is that interesting? Well, to have 5 months of 150 days it would necessarily have to be that each month was 30 days long, which is kind of interesting because in our calendar, we cannot have consecutive months 30 days long because of the change in rotations and so on and so forth of the earth after the flood, showing that in actuality, the year before the flood was like 360 days long. So I don't know if you'd ever seen this before. I know that we've talked about it before, brought it before, but I just wanted to refresh our minds that 5 months, 150 days, would be 30-day months. It came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from all the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, was the earth dried completely. So interesting. Just a little over a complete year was included in all these things that took place. A little over a year. So I just wanted to point that out because you say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, in a perfect world that was created originally, that was the calendar. It was created perfectly. I guess I jumped ahead. It says this is in Genesis 8:19. So everything was created perfectly in the beginning. We had the earth, the sun and the moon created on the fourth day. So we had every year it would come back to that same date, because if they were created equally on the same day, then that is what we call in astronomy today is a equinox, when day and night is completely equal time in each day, that's what it was in the week of creation. So when you came back to that place again, the next year, that would be it would all line up again. The sun and the moon would line up again on a new moon. So it says, every beast, every creeping thing, every fowl, and whatsoever creeps on the earth after his kind went forth out of the ark. And Noah built an altar unto Yahweh, and took of every clean beast, of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar, showing that this whole system, the sanctuary system, was in existence prior to Noah. How did he know to make an offering? How did he know to build an altar, and so forth? It says, and Yahweh smelled a sweet savor, and Yahweh said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. Interesting that he says the imagination of man's heart is evil. We have quite a few scriptures that bears that out, don't we? A lot of times we have people says, well, God knows my heart. Yeah, he knows how wicked and evil it really is. How man's heart is really wicked and evil. Said he would not again curse the ground anymore. Some take this as the curse that was placed upon the ground at Adam and Eve was lifted. But I don't know if we could really say that, because it says in sorrow you would give birth, and that you would earn your bread by the sweat of your brow. Well, those two things are still going on in the world. Nothing is given to us free without some work, sweat equity, or whatever you might call it. So I think the ground is still cursed because of man. All right, it says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So, kind of gives us an understanding that these things were in existence before the flood. That there was seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease even though that we do know that it had never rained. He said there was a mist that come up from the earth and watered the plants. And so we also, through science, have come to believe that the barometric pressure was considerably higher. That's why that things grew so prolifically on the earth and why they grew larger. So there was a lot of changes that was made that as a result of the flood physically to the earth itself. It says, so we're going to come off of that and thought it would. Can y'all change it? There you go. So we're going to tie into some of the things that we did talk about and maybe missed last Shabbat. Sacred calendar is based entirely on the new moon. Okay? The first new moon of the year is critical in that it sets the calendar for the year. We read in Exodus 12:1, and Yahweh spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. It says, and we kind of talked about that last time, is that this was not a change in the beginning of the earth. It was, I think, reminding them that you've kind of lost track of time here. Here it is. Here's the first of the year. If we do not know when the first day of the month is, we cannot obey Yahweh in the keeping of any of his feast days, because that's what sets the feast days. In Psalms 81:3 says, Blow up the trumpet in the new moon in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. For this is a statute for Israel and a law of Elohim of Jacob. So, that is a command to blow up the trumpet in the new moon in the time appointed on our solemn feast days, because it sets the feast days according to the phases of the moon. We talked about that last time, how that without the phases of the moon, how do we know when the month would begin? And I know that I've done some research and looking at some of the things that are on YouTube and so forth about the Enoch calendar, or priestly calendar as they're calling it, Zadok calendar. And one of the things is that they divorced the moon totally from the year, that it's only a solar calendar. And how that they begin the calendar is that it must begin on the fourth day of the week, which is Wednesday. They say that the beginning of a month has to be on a Wednesday, because at the fourth day of creation, sun and moon was created, and that is when time started. Well, it's interesting, a couple of things with that is that even though there was no sun and moon on the first day, he did call it the first day. First day, second day, third day, and then fourth day. So, however you want to look at that as far as time or whatever, we do know that that is directly connected to the seventh day Sabbath, Shabbat. So, when we come with the idea that the new month has to begin only on the fourth day of the week, and that creates a somewhat of a problem, in that some are saying, well, that also starts the count of the weekly cycle, which really puts everything off if you do that. Puts the Sabbath, way down and not on the seventh day, or not on Saturday. Or some say no, that the weekly cycle is okay, it's fine, but the time and monthly cycle begin on the fourth day with creation of the sun and the moon, and that each month would have to begin on the fourth day of the week. So what happens, once again, we're back to 28-day month. And we know that it wasn't that way before the flood. And we know it's not that way today because there's 29 days and about a quarter or half a day in the moon cycle. Okay, so to get around that idea, they've come up with this idea of intercalculation of days. Intercalculation of days is basically that if it the end of that month stops here and it's not Wednesday, then those whatever length of those days, 3 or 4 days or whatever, they're intercalculated days. In other words, it's a change in what they're saying. They're just calling it by a different name. Otherwise, it was called, when you had this lunar calendar that came out, was called non-days. After 28 days to get to the first of the month again was non-days. Well, now they just changed the wording and call them intercalculated days. And there's as many as 7 intercalculated days that fall throughout this calendar the way that they're trying to make it operate. So, and we learned last week that in creation on the 4th day, he says that both of these set the days, the years, the months. Takes both of them, it says in Genesis. Okay, so you cannot have truly a year just a solar calendar year. So even though that mathematically they manipulate this thing and it looks good, but just really sit down and look at it and just see if common sense will tell you that God say, well, you need to intercalculate days here, and you'll need to intercalculate them here, and so on and so forth. And even at that, they come up with 364-day year. We know that the year is 365 and a quarter days long. So from a scientific standpoint, and we know that I've had this conversation with people, well, those people down back there didn't have any knowledge of those things. They didn't have telescopes, and they didn't have the NASA's and the Navy astronomies and all these kinds of things to be able to see these movements and so forth. Well, it's pretty interesting. Said that Moses was trained up in all of the ways of those men, astronomers and so forth in Egypt. And how about the Magi? How did they know to look into the sky at a different time of the year and look at these stars and know that that was the star that had been predicted many thousands of years before the coming of the Messiah? If they didn't have any knowledge of the movements of the stars and the moon and the sun, they must have been pretty smart, been able to see that, calculate it, and follow that star to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem. So we're going to move on and look at a few more things. I know some of this is repetitive, but I just wanted to look at it because we didn't really look at the new moon itself. We as a congregation here, we celebrate the new moon as a Shabbat. I think there's adequate proof in the scriptures, and we're going to look at some of those things to see. And we know that also that if you do a lot of research in through Philo, which was a scholar back in probably sometime before the Second Temple period, and look at even Josephus' writings, I think that you'll see that the new moon was kept in the temple service. So, so we get into Ezra 45. It says, "Thus saith the sovereign Yahweh, in the first month, in the first day of the month, thou shalt take a young bullock without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary." That's interesting. You know, we haven't really drilled down and really looked at this very much. But he says, in the first day of the month, in the first month, in the first day of the month, they were to take a young bullock without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary. It's interesting why we see so many times in the scriptures of these events taking place on the first day of the month. It says, and the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering and put it upon the posts of the house and upon the four corners and of the settle of the altar and upon the posts of the gates of the inner court. And so thou shalt do the seventh day of the month for every one that erreth, and for him that is simple, so shall you reconcile the house. In the first month, in the 14th day of the month, you shall have a Passover, a feast of 7 days of unleavened bread shall be eaten. So this all starts at the first day of the first month and culminates into not only the Passover, but the 7 days of unleavened bread. Interesting that he shows here, though, that on the first day that they were to take a bullock and to cleanse the sanctuary itself. Some of the same things that we see in the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, that there was a cleansing of the sanctuary first, and then a cleansing of the people. So, just look at these things and see how it outlines up. It says each of the important dates for keeping the feast is laid down by Yahweh as stated in the Bible as a particular day of a particular month. Yahweh's sacred year begins with Abib. This is determined from the new moon nearest the vernal equinox in the northern hemisphere, which brings the spring-summer season. The autumnal equinox in the northern hemisphere brings the fall and winter season. So he reminded him, says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and the day and night shall not cease. And in Psalms it says, thou hast set all the borders of the earth, thou hast made summer and winter. So interesting borders of the earth that we see that these are these equinoxes, one in the spring and one in the fall. And from that is set when the new moon begins and the new month begins, the first of the year. So, because once again we talked about how that the sun and the moon was created on the fourth day and they were equal, so that would have had to been a vernal equinox, equal day and time in the night and in the day, in the daylight. So says the method of determining the month of Abib, which means springs, is that the Passover may not precede the equinox. These are just some of the inner workings of a calendar. The first day of the Passover season may fall on the equinox, but the first holy day of the Passover, which is, of course, the 15th day of unleavened bread, must fall after the equinox. Otherwise, it would be in the old year or in the winter season. Did you understand what was said there? Because once again, the vernal equinox is a solar event, ushers in the spring and summer of a new year. Because the year ended down here right up against before the equinox. If we had the Passover before the equinox, then you would basically wind up having two Passovers in the same year. You would be still in the old year because the old year runs all the way up until the vernal equinox. So, so that is the method to determine when Abib is. It is the new moon closest to the vernal equinox that allows the Passover to fall in that first month. The other thing that you have to make certain of is that, and that's why that this, if you call it postponement or adding an extra month, how you determine that is that if you wait until the next new moon that's after the equinox and start your month, you have to be careful that it's not into the second month. Because once again, the law says in the first month in its season shall be the Passover. So if you determine, well, no, that this won't work, and we use the next, then you're sometimes down past the end of the first month. And that, in my opinion, happened this year in the rabbinical calendar. It says, we're going to talk about the names. What about the new moon? Numbers 1:1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of the congregation on the first day of the second month in the second year after they came out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take you the sum of the congregation, children of Israel, after their families, by the house of their fathers, after families, by the house of their father, with the number of their names, every male by their polls, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers. Why? On the first day, or new moon, second month, or whatever. Why does these events seemingly taking place over and over again? He says, assemble the assembly together on this day. And we see this throughout scriptures. Could it be possibly because that was the day of worship, or that was the day that they didn't work, and everybody was, had done their duties? We sometimes think about the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness. That they didn't have a job, they didn't work, they didn't have to go nowhere. Well, that's not exactly true. But it talks about the hewers of the wood, the carriers of the water, all of these different types of things. And you can imagine how much work would have to be done to accommodate some 2 million people, just in the very essence of bringing life and keeping life going. So when these days of worship came, they were idle. They rested. So is it beyond comprehension that maybe that's why on the first day, the new moon, they didn't have work to do? It was a Shabbat. Just think about it. There are 11 days' journey from, this is in Deuteronomy 1:2, there are 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir into Kadesh Barnea. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spake unto the children of Israel, once again, on the first day of the month. Why didn't he say on the third day or fourth day, fifth day, whatever? Why didn't he say the seventh day? It says in Exodus 19:1, says, In the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. It says, And Aaron the priest went up into the Mount Horeb at the command of Yahweh, and died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the first day of the 5th month. Even his death. Interesting. On the first of the month, new moon. From the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto Yahweh, but the foundations of the temple of Yahweh was not yet laid. This is in Ezra's time. From the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings. Why didn't they go to work? Why weren't they working? Why wouldn't this be a record of, well, we started rebuilding the temple on the first day of this month? It says they came together and offered burnt offerings. For upon the first day of the first month began he to go up from Babylon, and on the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of his Eli upon him. For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of Yahweh, and to do it, and to teach it. Once again, this is a return of some of the children of Israel out of the Babylonian captivity to rebuild the temple. Continue on in Ezra, and the children of the captivity did so, and Ezra the priest was certain chief of the families after the house of their fathers, and all of them after their names were separated and set down in the first day of the 10th month to examine the matter. Why was it on the first day of the 10th month? To examine the matter. They all sat down. Was it because that this was a meeting day, that they were not working, that they would come together to examine the matter? And this matter was about the intermarriage among the tribes with other women of not kind. It says, and it goes on, and it says, in the first month, that is the month Abib, in some of your Bibles it'll say not Nisan. Nisan is a name that was placed for the first month while they were in Babylonian captivity. Some of the names that you see in the rabbinical calendar are names that they picked up out of Babylon. Even the name Tammuz is still used, the name of one of the months. You know that Tammuz was not at all about God. It says, Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur. This is Esther, I'm sorry, this is out of Esther 3:7. That is the lot before Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month. That is the month Adar. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenant. This was the day that they wrote that the death warrant for all of the Jews that were there. It says, and letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. And it came to pass in the 11th year, in the first day of the month, that the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, in other words, just to separate these two right here, here we had that on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, showing the calendar during that period of time. Adar is the 12th month of the year, unless there is a month added, and it's called Adar 2. But we see that this is right before Passover, basically, that he put this out. And of course, we know the story of Esther, how that she got the permission from the king that they would basically could defend themselves and so forth. So we're looking at Ezra 26:1. It came to pass in the 11th year, in the first day of the month, that the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, and we see this repeated many times in different prophets' writings. We can go on in Ezra 32:1. It came to pass in the 12th year, in the 12th month, in the first day of the month, that the word of Yahweh came into me, saying. Interesting. Why particularly was the Father talking to his prophets on the first day of the month, seemingly quite often? Was it me that, once again, that was a day of assembly, that was a day of rest, that was a day that they were not working? And sometimes we think that, well, the prophets didn't work anyway, but we see throughout scriptures that they did have things that they worked doing. Even Paul and all the apostles worked. It says, in the 10th year, in the 10th month, in the 12th day of the month, the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying. So, it's very specific in the scriptures, the times. I don't know if you've ever wondered, why particularly, what does that mean? What does that make a difference? And it sets down the day, the time of the year, and everything. That he does certain things, and he talks to his prophets, and he does this and does that. It says, and it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the first day of the month, that the word of Yahweh came into me, saying. Here's once again another place that in Ezra. or I'm sorry, this is not Ezra, this is Ezekiel. Sorry. This is Ezekiel. It says, then we see in Haggai 1:1, in the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the first day of the month, came the word of Yahweh by Haggai the prophet. So we see that also in Haggai, that all these different prophets are being visited by the Father on the new moon, on the beginning of the month. This is in 1 Samuel. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king sat down to eat food. And he said, no, that one, that's because these are separate. It says, when the new moon was come, the king sat down to eat, and he actually asked, where is David? This was a yearly or a monthly thing that they did. Every new moon, king sat down, they had a meal together, and wine. Were they celebrating the new moon? I would think so, because he said it was mandatory, basically, that David appear there. He said, yes, Jonathan, where's David? And he told him this kind of a little bit of a lie. He said, well, I think he's with family. In other words, if he was with family during the new moon, everything was fine. But we know how that all ended up. It says in 2 Kings 4, and he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? And this is a woman that was going to go seek the prophet. And it says, why are you going for him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it will be well. Why would it make a difference whether it was new moon or Sabbath? Because that would be the day that he would be available to people. That would be the day that he's resting from his duties, his travels, and so on and so forth. She said, in other words, he told her, says, I don't think you're going to find him because it's neither the new moon nor the Sabbath. As if it's on these days, he's going to be at this certain place. It says, and she said, it shall be well. And we skip to Numbers 10:10. It says, also on the day of your gladness and your solemn days and the beginning of your months, you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial. So, they were to blow the trumpets at the beginning of every month. That's why in the 7th month it's called the memorial of blowing of trumpets. It's a remembering that for 6 months you've been blowing your trumpet, blowing your shofar, sounding the beginning of the month, sounding a Shabbat, a time and day of rest. Okay? Okay, as we go on, this is Ezekiel 46. It says, thus saith the sovereign Yahweh, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. And the prince shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate without, and shall stand by the post of the gate, and the priest shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. Then he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. It says, likewise, the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before Yahweh in the Sabbaths and in the new moons. Why were they there worshiping on new moons? Evidently, it was something that had been set down from the beginning. We see all these different places where he limits the day and says, hey, by the way, look at this. Hey, by the way. But he's saying here that the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before Yahweh in the Sabbaths and in the new moons. Worship. So, I know that, even in Christianity we say, well, it's not, you don't really have to worship on Saturday, the Sabbath. It says, God just wants you to worship him one day a week. That, that we need to pay homage to them at least one day a week, But here he's limiting to a specific day. in the Shabbats, in the Sabbaths, and in the new moons, plural. Just kind of interesting. So then we move on to what we have, and we say every Shabbat, Isaiah 66:22. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says Yahweh, so shall your seed and your name remain. It shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbat to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, says Yahweh. It's pretty plain. Pretty plain. I know I've had people say, well, that it's just talking about a period of time between these two. Yet, would we say the same thing from one Shabbat to another? That we come and worship Him every Shabbat, from this Shabbat to the next Shabbat we're going to have. It's not the worshiping in between the Shabbats, it's the Shabbat itself. So, and they shall go forth and look upon the carcass of the men that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be at a whoring unto all flesh. So we're going to move on to Amos 8. Thus has the sovereign Yahweh showed unto me, and behold, a basket of summer fruit. This is Amos 8:1. And he said, Amos, what seest thou? And I said, a basket of summer fruit. Then said Yahweh unto me, the end is come upon my people of Israel, and I will not pass by them any more. And the songs of the temple shall be howlings in that day, saith the sovereign Yahweh. There shall be many dead bodies in every place. They shall cast them forth with silence. Hear this, O ye that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail, saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephod small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit? Now, what do we understand by this? He's telling them, says, you're taking advantage of everybody, the poor. You're even trying to cut the days that I have set aside to no work, no business, no transactions, no sale, no buy. Saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn? If the new moon is not a set apart day as a Shabbat, no work, no sale, what will be wrong with what they're doing? It says, hope the new moon, we're sitting here anticipating, man, as soon as that sun goes down, we're going to get out and sell corn. Same thing with the Shabbat. And we know that you can read in Ezra where that this same thing was taking place when they were rebuilding Jerusalem. That they would come in on Friday evening at sunset and start to sell their wares. And he run them out. And even set guards at the gate. Wouldn't let them in. But they kept coming up because they wanted to sell their wares on the Shabbat. Kind of the same thing here. During the week, everybody's working, busy. We're not out really shopping. Our wives do that shopping. But for men and everybody to go out and really shop for something like a car or a house or something major, you have to wait till you're off work to be able to do that. So, finally, that they kept showing up, and he finally told them, he says, if you come back, he says, we're going to lay hands on you. You're not going to like it. Because that's what this Shabbat is all about. We need to guard the Shabbat in our own lives. As he's called us to be separate. Be separated from the world. To pay homage to him, the great creator of this universe. What a great God that we have that would actually create a day and set aside a day in his busy schedule to come and be with his people. I'm sure that God's just not sitting up there on a cloud floating around and taking it easy. I'm sure that he's working. But he set aside a time of his busy schedule to meet with us every Shabbat, every feast day, every new moon. Kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? I want to go back to what we was talking about, the cleansing of the temple on the new moon of the first month. We're going to reread it. This is Ezekiel 45. Thus saith the sovereign Yahweh, in the first month, in the first day of the month, thou shalt take a young bullock without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary. So what has that got to do with us? Does it have any appeal or any demands upon our actions? You know, the entire system of worship in Israel was based around the tabernacle and the temple. It was the center of all activity. This physical tabernacle and temple was a copy of the heavenly sanctuary. You can read about it in Hebrews. You can read about it in Exodus. But Moses upon a mountain showed him the heavenly sanctuary. He says, I want you to build me this same thing here on this earth where I can come and dwell with my people. It says this physical temple was a copy of the heavenly structure, which is a spiritual edifice. And Moses was shown a plan on which to build the physical tabernacle. The worship of Jehovah had to be pure, and he desired to be worshipped in spirit and in truth. Sit down particular ways how to worship him. It's not just whenever you worship him that it's fine, or in the manner. That was the very thing that he told them when they were fixed to go in. He says, don't ask from these nations how that they worship their God. Just follow the way that I want to be worshipped. It says the physical system pointed towards the Messiah because it's taught the sanctuary is about the coming of a Messiah, a Savior. In every sacrifice that was made was the teaching of a coming Messiah. It says in a spiritual temple was Israel as a assembly. We are that spiritual temple. Physical had to be cleansed and the priesthood made ready for the Passover, as we have to be cleansed and made ready for the second sacrament. This is the significance behind Yeshua cleansing the temple, as we read in the New Testament, both at the beginning of his ministry and before the Passover of his death, when he established the Lord's Supper and preparation day for the Passover meal. Thus, the physical cleansing pointed toward us as the spiritual temple of living stones. By our action, we intercede for the simple and errors of Israel and thus assist in the protection of the nation. We assist in the spiritual cleansing of the temple and so help to sanctify the nation in which we reside. The new moon of the first month is the start point of this process, and the moon represents Israel. Christ's actions in cleansing the temple were in accordance with Scripture. Christ effected the cleansing of the temple of God as a physical act in cleaning out the money changers. And this came from the law and the cleansing of the temple of God that we just read. I don't know if you'd ever thought about it in that sense. Well, Yeshua didn't do anything that was different from the plan from the very beginning. He said he came to do the will of his Father. He spoke only the words that the Father gave him. He did only the actions that the Father told him to do. It says this cleansing begins the process of reconciliation of man to God. It was first a physical act in a physical temple to point towards the spiritual cleansing of the spiritual temple. We are the spiritual temple, and the cleansing begins with us on the first new moon of each month of each year. It then goes on throughout the year from new moon to new moon, and this will continue on. So it is now a spiritual act in a spiritual temple, which makes it more powerful and just as mandatory. We have learned that these feast days are for us, not only showing the end from the beginning, but how we as God's people are to cleanse our spiritual temple each day. And that these days are set in specific for special cleansing of our temples. So I hope that you learn something from all this, or at least have the knowledge. Okay, and that's what this is about. The choices is always our own personal choices. We have that choice to choose the things that He wants us to do, or to choose our own way. We know that we cannot please God by worshiping Him in our own way, but by His way. So that is the reason why that we have a calendar to follow. And I hope that this will stir you to maybe do some research and reading on calendars and so forth. Because, as the end grows closer, there's going to be more and more and more things out there. The old saying is that Satan will give you lots of hooks to hang your doubts on. So if you're doubting what's going on, get into the Word and see what it says and follow it. So Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Thank you for being here. Hope you have a good week calendar Pt2 is what is usually said. That means have a blessed week.
Thank you for watching a teaching from Emet HaTorah. If you are ever in the Odessa area, we would love to welcome you to our Shabbat service, 11 a.m. every Sabbath. For more information or for more teachings, feel free to find us on the web, www.emethatorohodessa.com. Also, you can find us on Facebook. Thank you. God bless you and your family. Shalom.